Okay, so this is the custom metrics tab. This is the area that is going to allow you to do a lot of customization if you are so inclined. Just the first things to point out is that you can use um, filters here to determine the number of elements for each category that are going to be displayed. So that was on quarterback. We can select all of them again, all the positions. You can sort the numbers in ascending or descending order, and you can do that for all of these columns. You'll notice that for every player there is an index number. That is just to give that player a unique identifier. You don't really have to worry about that. Now, you can only click into columns that allow you to edit the fields within that column. So the ones that you can edit, you have my tier, my ADP, M1, M2, and M3. So that gives you 3 columns that you can put whatever you want in, and you have a column that will allow you to include your own tiers and your own ADP. So if I were to include my own tier and my ADP, I would go back to the settings tab. I would make sure that my ADP source is set to my ADP down at the bottom here. In my tier source, I would go and select my tier. What happens when you do that then is if you go back to the custom metrics tab and you find Todd Gurley and you put his tier 3, and the other one we use, for example, is Antonio Brown. You can say he's tier 2. Obviously, you would never do that, and I apologize. If I try to do videos where the dog is not barking, I'm never going to get any done, so we're just going to go with that. And in my ADP, just to show you the same thing, Phoebe, stop. So for my ADP, so for Todd Gurley, you could set him as 1, set Ezekiel Elliott as 2, put Antonio Brown at 3, and then I'll show you what happens after that. So we've set those. If we go to the RV dash tab, now you can see if we go over to running back, and we go up here, you can see that Ezekiel Elliott has a tier 2, Todd Gurley is a tier 3, and you can look and you can see that now Todd Gurley has the ADP of 1, Ezekiel Elliott has the ADP of 2, and then just to further demonstrate, if we look at wide receiver, Antonio Brown has an ADP of 3. We didn't include a tier for him, so that defaults to putting a player in tier 7. So players you don't care about, just leave blank, they'll get put in tier 7. However, we can now go over to Antonio Brown. If we put a 1 into the my tier column for him, and then we go over to the RV dash, it will put him now in tier 1. Now, when you don't set the ADP for players and you are on the My ADP, what the tool will do is it will default to using the selected ADP. So it will make some adjustments for what players you did include the ADP for, and then it will use your selected ADP as a guide to fill out the rest of the ADP. Now, if you want specific directions on using this tab, click this link here, and that will bring you down to the bottom where I have directions that you can review if you need to. Now, there's also this column for age. That calculates for just about all of the players. There's a couple that I could not find a specific date of birth, so for those I had to go just based off of the year. But for most players, it's calculating off of the given day that we are currently at their age. So that's in this column. It's missing for some players, but like every relevant player I think I have it for. And then years, obviously, is their experience in the league. RV low, that is going to show the worst tier that any of the RotoViz rankers had a player in. So for Mark Ingram, his worst tier that a ranker, if you will, put him in was tier 4. His high was 3. So that is saying that the most optimistic the RotoViz tiers or rankers were about Mark Ingram was him being a tier 3 running back, and the worst was a tier 4 running back. Then what we do here in this RV composite column, which is really cool, is it's summing the tiers that the 7 rankers put each player into. So you can see for Todd Gurley, he's at a 7. Every player put him in as a tier 1 running back, whereas Ezekiel Elliott Though most people had him at 1, there were 2 people that put him into tier 2. So you can use that to kind of separate players a little bit more if you wanted to. So we could sort this ascending and give my computer a second. It sometimes operates a little bit slow when I'm using the screen recorder, and then you uncheck the 0 here. So you filter that out, and you can start to see where the separation is in certain positions. And we could even take this a step further, and we could look just at running backs. So if we do that, you can see there's a lot of optimism for Gurley, Le'Veon Bell, and David Johnson. Saquon Barkley actually slots in pretty nicely. And remember, don't worry about that index. He got added to the database later, so he has a index of 661, whereas obviously Todd Gurley, Le'Veon Bell, and David Johnson were some of the first players that got built in. So we will uncheck these filters. We'll select all. I'm really sorry about the dog barking. Phoebe, please stop that, honey. We unfilter here, select all of them, and so now everything's back. So here is the cool thing about this year's tool. You might be saying to yourself, I really don't feel like going through and putting in manually all of this information. Well, the good thing is if you have that information somewhere else, right, you can use this data importer tab to bring in that data. So I am going to open a new sheet here, and let's say that in a different spreadsheet, you had something that looked like this. It had player's name, and it had a grade, okay? And then maybe it had something like a projection that you had built. So maybe you built projections using our projection machine. And we're just doing an example with a couple of players just for demonstration purposes. So maybe you have Drew Brees, you have Alvin Kamara, and you have Zach Ertz. All right, and these are the grades. I'm just putting in random things here, so don't worry about it. And then the projection, Drew Brees could maybe be at 20 points per game, Alvin Kamara at 17, and maybe Zach Ertz came out at 14. Just all super hypothetical here. What you would do to import the grades easily, you would take your information, so you would take the player name, and you would take the metric that you're wanting to import, and you would paste them into these columns here. Okay? Now what you see after you do that, and if you want to do it nicely so that everything still looks nice visually, you can paste the values. Which, okay, as you can tell, I don't use this computer that much for Excel. So anyways, paste those in. If you get a yes, you're cool. Let's say that you had spelled Alvin Kamara differently, and you did it like Alvin Kamara. You're going to get this no. So with a player like Le'Veon Bell is a good example. I have to make sure that you have the apostrophe in there. Or for Odell Beckham Jr., the tool's convention is that there's no period. So if you had Odell Beckham Jr. with a period, you're going to get this error. You would just go in to make sure that it matches so that we have consistent spelling. And now you're good to go. And now you could say import this to M1. Tool is going to go ahead. It's going to do a couple of nifty things behind the scenes. And it's going to load that in. Now, same thing, we could take the projections. We can copy that information over. We come in here. We paste that. Now we go to import to M2. And if we go over to the custom metrics page, or tab, excuse me, you can see now Zach Ertz has the A-. Drew Brees has the A, and if we scroll up, Alvin Kamara, the A, 17 is now in M2, 14 for Zach Ertz in M2, and you have Drew Brees at the 20. So you can do the same thing if you want them if you wanted them to go to tier or ADP, it's the same concept, right? You would hit import to my ADP, run a couple of things in the background, import to my tier. Okay. And now if we go back to the custom metrics, you will see that sure enough, those show up in my tier and my ADP. If you want to clear the data that you imported from those areas, you could go a clear import from custom metrics. And when you do that, if we go over to the custom metrics tab, you'll see there's no longer information in M1 and M2. And then if we go back to the data import here, you go clear my ADP, clear my tier. If you come back to the custom metrics, you'll see that those are now gone. So that is data importing and using the custom metrics. And finally, if you want to clear this information out, you could just go up to clear import columns. That information will go away. And then if you're like me and it's going to bother you that you lost the formatting when you did that paste, just copy those cells and then paste them back over. A reminder, I probably haven't talked about this yet in the videos, but what I like to do is save multiple files. So I'll save different versions of the tool with the name of the draft. So I might have RotoViz draft dashboard July 16th ESPN, and then one that says ESPN August 27th, and another one that's CBS August 31st. And then I can have different metrics or different configurations already set up for those leagues, so that when I go to draft, everything is all set up nicely and I'm not scrambling on the day that I draft. Anything else I need to mention here? Oh yeah, the cool thing here is when you play with these custom metrics, right, you can go in and you put whatever you want in here, right? You can put any information that you want. And then when you go to the dashboard, as you may have guessed, if we just put some random numbers down this column, and then we go over to the dashboard, what you can do is you can use the drop downs included in here. Let me zoom in for you. If you zoom in, you can toggle what is in these metrics. So if I wanted, and even though I don't recommend looking at this maybe outside of best ball, you could pull in bye week. You could also switch. You could bring in the low. You could bring in the RB composite. Or you could bring in any of those custom metrics columns so that you can have that information there when you're drafting, and that's going to be there for every position, as you can see as we cycle through. So the only thing left that I think I need to explain is what these mean. So obviously age, years, we talked about those. Plus, less, minus ADP is just going to compare the difference between a player's ADP and where they are. Phoebe, stop. So plus, less, minus ADP is just going to compare where we are in the draft against that player's ADP. So just to show you real quickly what I mean, let's just have one pick get mocked. And maybe we'll do another pick getting mocked. So as you can see at this point, Ezekiel Elliott's ADP is 3. We get to a 0 on his plus, less, minus ADP because his ADP is 3. We're on the 3rd pick. Whereas Alvin Kamara is an ADP of 6, so his plus, less, minus ADP is 3 because we're on the 3rd pick. So when you start to see players dip into the negative, you can have an idea that they've been hanging around longer than you would expect. So just to show you exactly what I mean, you can see Kamara is starting to move down. We'll draft Leonard Fournette there, have it draft Dalvin Cook, and now you can see Kamara's at -1 because it's pick 7. He has an ADP of 6. Same thing if Zeke hadn't gone here, he has an ADP of 3. We're at pick 7, so he has a plus, slash, minus ADP of 4. And I know that's something that a lot of people like to look at least in talking with people that have used the tool. So again, use these. You can configure things however you like. We talked about the custom metrics. This is a useful sheet too if you just want to look at the different ADP for the various sources that we have, and then you have the data import. So hopefully that makes sense. There's detailed directions in there. You can read through the steps again and just play around with it, and you should be good to go.